It literally makes me want to, text my sisters and be like, hey, like, I love you. And they're just probably going to be like, what's happening right now? I'm gonna be like, I watched Peacemaker season 2, episode 3. This episode of Peacemaker had everything. And I really mean, especially if we're talking HBO, everything. Welcome back, everyone. We are here to talk about Peacemaker season 2, episode 3. Another Rick up my sleeve. Before we just talk about this episode, I just want to say I really appreciate the titles for the episodes because they actually are so memorable, and I have not had a show that has had a memorable episode title in a while. I can't tell you the last time I remember titles for episodes being so memorable. This episode is all about Chris exploring the other world. So Chris ends up, going into the other universe. Let's just call it Earth 2 for safety's sake. Not the official term, but we do call all these alternate versions 2, like Harcourt 2. That's in the subtitles, so I'm just gonna go with 2 for now. I know that in DC, Earth 2 is its own thing, all right? Don't at me. That's where we kind of start the episode off with, because at the end of episode 2, obviously Chris was responding to Harcourt 2's message, realized, I don't have a reception here because I'm in the other universe, and popped over to send that text, and then kind of passes out and wakes up and has to deal with the fact that now he's here, and what does he do? And now in this alternate universe, he's made these plans, so he has to run to go meet with Harcourt, and we see kind of their relationship in this universe. He also has to confront the ghost of Rick Flag Jr., who is alive in this world and is very different. And along the way, he also realizes just how beloved he is. We also get to see the awesome ride that Chris has in this universe. His motorcycle, which is super sick, by the way, and which apparently James Gunn just has after the set. He kept it, which is pretty cool. We have all of that happens. He meets up with Harcourt. They have this chat, this heart-to-heart. Things seem to be going pretty well. And then there's an attack that they kind of get pulled into, and Chris is pulled into action, and he messes so many people up. There is a explosion in the background as he gives a thumbs up to Harcourt in this universe. It seems like maybe there is potential here for this romance to continue, even though obviously Harcourt 2 does not know that this is an alternate version of the man she was dating, who also killed that alternate version. And we kind of end this episode with a really intense heart-to-heart with Keith and Chris. And obviously Keith is Chris's brother, who in season 1, we learned in his backstory, Chris killed accidentally when his dad was making them fight one another for money, which is pretty messed up. And so there's this moment when Keith talks to him that's just, man, it hits. We're going to talk about it more. But basically that's what happens in this episode. It was such a ride. There are things we need to discuss. Before we get into what happened in this episode, I just want to give a free spoiler warning out there. If you have not watched this episode, as was implied in our intro, you should really do that, man. It's insane, my friend. It is insane. I think what I want to start off with here is the epicness of these fights. And one of the things that I really love about Peacemaker is the fights. I recently did a short where I was talking about how season 1 is kind of more horror and season 2 is a bit more fantasy, but something that I think unites these seasons, even though they kind of fit in different subgenres, is obviously the superhero genre that they are a part of at large, which tends to be quite action adventure. I think there's always elements of sci-fi and fantasy in superhero as well, but really, it's about, there's a lot of action in superhero projects. And so something that this does really well is nail all of those elements. It's not afraid to go to these bigger places. And this sequence where Peacemaker is in the alternate universe and he has to take on this organization that wants to, cause chaos, cause mayhem around them, the Sons of Liberty, which I feel like echoes as well Creature Commandos' Sons of Themyscira, which I kind of like. But Sons of Liberty, I believe, also appeared in the comics. And I actually thought it was funny because one of the first Sons of Liberty that we see that gets taken out, I think their name was Jerry. Don't quote me on this. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that Jerry is one of the first people that's taken out. And I think it's Jerry Ordway, who is one of the creators of the Sons of Liberty. Yeah, it is. Jerry Ordway is credited as the creator for the Sons of Liberty in the New Earth continuity, not in the Prime Earth continuity, but I digress. I just thought that was really interesting. And these people get so messed up by Peacemaker. Man, I think my favorite one is the guy that gets the pencils in the ears. And I loved that when he grabbed the pencils, I was literally thinking to myself, this is such a John Wick moment. But then he grabbed 2 pencils. And I was like, I've seen 1 pencil, but what are we gonna do with 2 pencils? And then I found out. So all of that sequence I think is very, very well done. I really like that. But the cool thing about Peacemaker is that it's not just action, And it was also interesting because in the short that I did recently, there were a lot of people too that were like, what do you mean it's horror? What do you mean it's fantasy? Where are you getting, you're just making stuff up. And I was like, literally James Gunn says this in the episode 1 podcast. He talked about the shift tonally. And it's interesting because I've talked about this as well myself in my reviews. I actually felt the tonal shift at the beginning of season 2, and I wasn't sure initially how I felt about it. Now that we're settling in, I think all of the elements that I love of Peacemaker are still here. And the fact that we're exploring this kind of other universe, I think represents something else for Chris's character too that takes a lot from the comics. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I want to save that, I think, for last, talking more about Chris and what's going on with him. But what I'd like to just highlight here is that we still have these really dramatic moments. We have this great moment, obviously, with Chris and Keith, and their kind of heart-to-heart that I said at the end. And I think Keith says something that's really powerful to Chris. He basically says to him, like, you're my brother, and like, it doesn't matter what's going on, you can always tell me. It doesn't matter what you do or how bad it is, like, you're always going to be my brother and nothing will ever change that. And to hear that from someone like Keith, considering their history, their past in, the universe that Chris is from, it was so heartbreaking. Man, it left me in tears by the end of this episode. But it's such a wild ride. The thing that I love about Peacemaker is we can also have, Chris driving down the street and seeing a kid that's like enamored with him as a hero in this universe, and also seeing this woman who like clearly is enamored with him in her own way. And we can have these kind of goofy moments, but then everything can still be so grounded. I think that's something that James Gunn does really well when it comes to the superhero genre, is he's not afraid to reach for these big moments, but he also understands that for things to feel real to people, there has to be some kind of buy-in. And he makes these characters feel real because even though it's a crazy idea to be in another dimension where you've, assumed the place of your other version and you're talking to your brother who in your reality is dead, even though all of that is ridiculous, we can all understand what it's like to connect with someone who is there for us no matter what, who sees and loves us as we are unconditionally. And we know what it's like to be there for family members who need us. And so there's a lot that you can connect with there. I know for me personally, I literally thought of my sisters and, how much I love my sisters and would do anything for them as well. That's the whole idea of that. It's just so relatable. It literally makes me want to, text my sisters and be like, hey, like, I love you. And they're just probably going to be like, what's happening right now? I'm going to be like, I watched Peacemaker season 2, episode 3. So it's relatable on so many levels, but it's not afraid to be goofy. And that's another element of Peacemaker that I freaking love. We have Joel Kinnaman returning in this season in episode 3. Joel Kinnaman obviously played Rick Flag Jr. in The Suicide Squad. If you haven't seen that, I would highly recommend you give it a watch. This keeps making me want to go back and watch The Suicide Squad. I might have to do a watch along party for the people over on Patreon or for folks on my Discord or something. We're gonna do something because I need to watch it. We need to discuss. I didn't get to discuss it on the channel, and I need to. So Joel was there, and he played Rick Flag Jr., but he was also in Suicide Squad, David Ayer's Suicide Squad. And this episode is huge because not only does it bring back Joel as Rick Flag Jr., but we also establish something that apparently James Gunn and Jennifer Holland have known since the beginning of Peacemaker, that Harcourt's character had a relationship with Rick Flag Jr. And while they seem to be intimate together, as we see at the beginning of this episode, which was such a wow, I was so shocked by that. I thought it was such a cool twist to add in. And it makes sense with everything that we have. They're also besties. And so, of course, that's why at the beginning of the show, Harcourt really hates Chris. She really hates Peacemaker because this is the person that, took her best friend away from her. Someone that she loved. Which adds a whole other level of complexity to their relationship and why it also might be really hard for Harcourt to open up to this guy who she clearly has feelings for. But there's probably also a lot of guilt there too, That's a lot. That is a lot. And not only that, but Joel Kinnaman comes back and gets to be such a different version of Rick Flag Jr. James Gunn said that he actually wrote this character wrote Rick into the alternate universe because he wanted to bring Joel Kinnaman back because he loved his approach to comedy and actually thought he was really funny on the set of the Suicide Squad. And he wanted to give him more of an opportunity to explore, the comedic side of acting because it's not something that Joel Kinnaman usually gets cast in comedic roles. So bringing him back as Rick, I thought was really cool. It's also really cool because we get to see Peacemaker's reaction to basically confronting a ghost. And something that if you know the character from the comics, you may know about him. And this is the thing that I wanted to say. I'll get back to it at the end because it plays a lot into Chris's character development in the show, and I think in the comics as well. Tied to that is that sometimes, it depends on who's writing Peacemaker, but he has this thing where in his helmet he can see ghosts. He sees the ghosts of the lives that he's taken. In some cases, also the ghosts of the people that his father, the lives that his dad had taken. So there's a lot that goes with that. And we kind of saw a little bit of an allusion to this in season 1, where Chris sees his dad, Augie, after he has killed him. But I was wondering how far we were going to take that and how literal we were going to take that. And what I like about this is I've realized that James Gunn is using this alternate universe as a way to put Chris in these situations where he literally has to confront these ghosts. I mean, his dad is alive here. His brother is alive here. Both people whose lives he took. In one case intentionally, in another case accidentally. And Rick Flag Jr. is here. He also has to confront that ghost. And I just think it's such a smart way of putting him in those situations and playing into some other stuff that we're building in the main plot and having it not quite be as literal as him just seeing straight up ghosts. It's Chris dealing with the fact of, I think he does have a lot of regrets and a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff that he still blames himself for. And this is a way for him to kind of escape holding himself accountable in the real world, because in this world, everyone's just alive and everything's good and everything's better than it's ever been. So it's that question of, do you want to face the world that's hard, but that is your world, and grow as a person, continue to grow as a person by confronting your past and your mistakes? Or do you want to escape? And escapism is what this season is all about, as James Gunn has kind of said, that idea of fantasy, of living in a world where everything feels like a dream. I can't wait to see if this world is twisted in some way too, because I don't fully trust it. But we shall see. Anyways, those are all my thoughts on this episode pretty much. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Are you also watching the podcast as well? I find it to be super insightful, and I love that they're doing that for each episode. And it's so cool, man. We got to go back. We got to watch the Suicide Squad again. What a great time that movie was. That's all I got for this one. Let me know your thoughts. I can't wait to discuss. And until next time, friends, stay nerdy. Bye! And if you like when I talk about the DCU, make sure you click this.